Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Theatre 3. I'm Jamie McCall from PLB. We're a design and heritage consultancy based up in York. I'm chairing the theatre, and I'm glad to be able to introduce this next session, which is called Looking Forward, Sector Research and Open Opportunities. Has everybody got headsets? Everybody on Channel 3? Everyone can hear me? Great. So if I introduce Lucy Bird, who's the Research and Policy Lead, Joe Jefford, the Programmes Coordinator, and Ying Tan, the Senior Programmes Manager from our fund. And if you just give them a warm welcome. Thank you.
Hi everyone, lovely to meet you. It's very surreal on the headset. I'm sure every speaker has said this, so if you can't hear, just give me a wave. But I am Lucy, I'm the Policy and Research Lead and really excited to be spending the next 40 minutes together. So you know what to expect, what's coming up. I'm going to talk you through some of the findings from our Museum Directors research, and then Joe and Ying are going to talk you through some of our open opportunities. So that's going to include acquisitions, some curation grants, and also commissioning grants. So lots to cover. If any of you don't know who Art Fund are, we're the charity that connects museums, people and art. We work UK-wide and we celebrated our 120th birthday last year. We do three main things. The first is funding art, so we'll talk to you more about that today. We also build and grow audiences. We have 135,000 members of our national art pass all across the UK, and we help to connect museum lovers to great museums. And finally, we amplify the museum sector, and a key way we do this is through our Museum of the Year prize. We've just shortlisted 5 museums for the prize this year, so that's always an exciting moment. So I'm going to crack straight on with our sector research. We started this during the pandemic, and now we're running it every other year. And this is really to look at the challenges and the opportunities for museums and the wider sector, really focusing on funding, on collections, on audiences. So I'm going to talk you through some of the findings. Can I... You were saying earlier the clicker went rogue, and now is the moment it's going rogue. Yeah, just use the mouse instead. Cool. Okay, so we were really lucky this year. Loads of people got involved. We had 324 museum directors respond all across the UK. And we had some one-on-one conversations with a host of different museums listed below. So from independents, local authority, universities. So it's a really nice broad representation of the sector. I will try and click the slides. Woohoo, they work. So the first area we looked at was income. And as you can all imagine, this is a particularly challenging issue. Lots of things I'm sure you'd expect. Pressures from cost of living, static or reduced funding, inflation, energy bills, competition for funds, and delivering fair wages. And all of this is before even a local authority cuts and issues come into play. So it really is a whole host of challenges. And it was interesting to compare this back to 2022 when we last did the survey. And half of museums in 2022 said they were concerned about funding shortfalls, and that figure has grown. It's now 2/3. So we're seeing even more pressure than ever before, with museums telling us they need 10 to 20% increase in funding just to stabilise. And the rather complicated looking graph on the right is just showing that for most different types of income, funding has stopped or stayed the same. And the only area that's been growing is earned or commercial income. So now half of museums have said that grew last year, but that's kind of to be expected. When everything else is declining, people are trying to find more ways to generate income. So we also did a bit of a deep dive into local authorities with all of the horrible Section 114s and growing issues across the UK. So of everyone we surveyed, 56% said they are reliant on local authority funding. So that goes to show it does really impact a very big proportion of our sector. And 1/3 of museums said they had their local authority funding decrease or stop completely, with building maintenance being their major issue, really at crisis levels. And there were some examples of some local authorities working really well with museums and heritage organisations, but often they are quite few and far between. The kind of pressures on local authorities across the UK were really stark. So with all of those kind of funding issues in mind, we asked people what kinds of things aside from funding might help. So people gave us a list of different suggestions, from transport to marketing to advocacy. And I think these are quite interesting in the context of cultural devolution and different political parties saying they want to further devolve more powers to local communities, and thinking about how we really value culture and embed museums and heritage into local strategies. So that does kind of seem to be an opportunity and a will for people to get involved in that. Okay, so next we asked about audiences, who's actually coming to see all of these wonderful spaces. So some positive news, you'll be pleased to hear, on audience numbers. So we asked how do visiting and participation figures compared to last year, and over half said that these increased. So that's really positive. 32% saying that they stayed the same, and quite a small percentage saying they decreased. So despite funding challenges, it is something to feel pleased about, that audiences are returning and growing. And then we also asked people, what are the development areas for your organisation in terms of audience development? And this was quite interesting to see. So we asked people, what are all the areas that you care about in terms of audience development, and which areas are your priority focus? And the one that most people spoke about is local audiences. So over 80% said they were focusing on that. And then over 60% said that was their top priority. And there was quite a big gap between that and the rest. So that came through really strongly, that local audiences are a big audience development priority for this year and next. So next we asked some questions on collections and exhibitions. So 95% said they're developing new temporary exhibitions next year. But it was quite interesting to also see that 40% of people are saying they're extending the length of their exhibition displays. So they are developing new work, but because of the financial challenges, they're often extending the length of time that's on show for. And we also snuck in a question about entrance charges. We know it's always a constant debate. Art Fund have done a lot to support free entry. So it's interesting to see 12% are thinking about bringing in entrance charges. So it'll be interesting in a few years, again, to see if that changes with the other financial pressures. Then we dove a bit more into collections specifically. So people talking about work they're doing around acquisitions, deaccessioning. But what was useful here to see is that a lot of people are planning to engage the community in that work, 82%. So that feels really promising, that thinking about local audiences and community engagement, those relationships should be happening hand in hand in terms of collections work. And then finally, a few other bits to flag from this section. Something came out quite strongly around partnerships. So 63% said they're now working with museums in partnership to develop exhibitions. And that figure was 46% in 2022. So it's really encouraging to see that is really growing and increasing. Around half of museums said they were claiming the museums and galleries exhibition tax relief. And for nerdy people like me who follow this, in the spring budget, the sunset clause was removed. So we're hoping more people will be able to access this tax relief, and some barriers for local authorities and touring exhibitions came up. So this is something Art Fund want to try and kind of increase those numbers. And then this was a bit more concerning, this bottom bullet point. So we were asking people around if they're intending to carry out collections reviews. In 2022, 71% said they were, and now this is down to 58%. So I think this follows the trend that the kind of back of house collections care is harder to raise money for. Often it's the audience focused things that people can fund a bit more easily. So that back of house is an area that seems to kind of dip in terms of resources. Great. So I'm now going to talk through a few key challenges and then a few key opportunities before I hand over. This is a very long list of key challenges that we asked people. So again, we were asking, what are all the challenges you're facing and what are the main priority challenges? And things came out really strongly here were around building operation cost and building maintenance, also staff capacity and funding shortfalls. So I'm sure none of that is of surprise to anybody. And again, people saying they need increase in funding just to stabilise, thinking more about how to engage local audiences, underserved groups, and a real sense there is a worsening picture for local authorities and there does need to be a real focus on support for this area. Something museums spoke a lot about is that they feel undervalued and they're doing all this incredible work in this very, very challenging context. And that lack of recognition can be really challenging for morale, well-being when colleagues are doing so many amazing things. And some of these underfunding pressures, as I said, creating issues on buildings, exhibitions, and staffing and collections care. However, despite this plethora of issues and challenges, we also asked about future opportunities, especially thinking about a general election year, even though culture has devolved. So some things will just impact England, some things more UK-wide, but this is a real year. We want to be talking more about what are the opportunities, what do we want to be doing and seeing. So we started off asking people to future gaze, think over the next 5-10 years, what do you think some of those opportunities would be? And really having more recognition of the amazing work museums and heritage do is a big part of this. And that really links to the social impact point around culture education, well-being, really integrating all of the amazing things that museums deliver against. And something that came out that I hadn't really thought about, it's just cut off on the edge of this slide, public space. So here people were talking about how museums especially could be a space where people can come, they can debate and discuss challenges of the future and have those difficult conversations, learn new things, hear different points of view. And as the world becomes more complex, things are changing more, museums being the space to really have those debates. That kind of came out quite strongly as a future opportunity. And then, as you'd expect, things around placemaking, digital, and new ways of working. Then we also asked about government interventions that people would like to see. So we've clustered these into 4 main groups, and this recognition point is really key in terms of sustainable funding, long-term funding for enough years that can be integrated into strategies. Then cultural education, this came out really strongly the whole way through, from early years to schools to higher education. And again, something all political parties do seem to be fairly on board to support. Some quite strong asks around ending the culture wars and more support for restitution and repatriation and centralised support and systems that can help people do more of this work. And then some quite specific suggestions around tax. So whether that is to incentivise donations and philanthropy, changes to museums and galleries tax relief, or even disincentives, tax disincentives for exporting works of art abroad, or incentives to keep works of art here in the UK. So kind of quite a useful host of options there. And the last slide I'm going to leave you on. Again, we asked people to pull out kind of top priorities within this. And these were the 3 main things that people said kind of collectively we should be asking for and talking about. So I think this is again, that recognition point that came up time and time again. Regional funding, so really thinking about a review of the funding systems, kind of back to the old renaissance of the regions that the Labour government did when Chris Smith was Secretary of State, but a complete review and rethink about how regional funding works and thinking about how cultural devolution could link into that. And this cultural education piece. So a lot of people spoke about curriculum, embedding culture more into the curriculum, and also about visits to museums, heritage sites, and working with schools. And yeah, really promoting that. So these were the kind of 3 key takeaway areas to leave you with something positive to think about. We're going to be publishing this research at the end of the month. There's a lot more graphs and slides and stats, so do dive into that when it comes out, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. And I'm going to pass on to Joe, who's going to talk us through open opportunities.
Great, thanks so much, Lucy. Okay, can everyone hear me okay? Hopefully you can. Great, fantastic. Hello, my name's Joe, and I am a program coordinator at Art Fund. I work on the acquisition grants program and on the Jonathan Ruffer curatorial grants program. So I'm going to speak about both of those today in terms of our open opportunities. Both of these programs support museums and galleries to research, build, and display their collections. So I'll share some information on what we can offer and speak about some successful examples. So to begin with, our acquisition grants program, we believe that new acquisitions allow museums and galleries to interpret the world, spark debate, and provide fresh entry points for audiences. We can assist with the purchase of works of art and other objects of artistic interest, dating from antiquity to the present day, and the grants can range from a few £100s at the lower end up to hundreds of thousands. Through this program, we've supported hundreds of different arts organisations to build their collections, and we welcome applications from organisations that we've worked with before, as well as those who we are still yet to work with. In terms of eligibility, we will consider applications from UK public museums, galleries, historic houses, libraries, and archives that are open for at least half the week for at least 6 months of the year, and are at least provisionally accredited under the Arts Council accreditation scheme. As you can see on screen here, we have a number of different funding streams within the acquisitions program. The first of those is large grants. So this is where the request is above £7,500 and or where the total cost of the work is more than £15,000. These applications are assessed at board meetings, which take place 5 times per year. The next is small grants. So these are requests of under 7,500, where the total cost of the work is under 15,000. We have a rolling deadline for applications for this program, so they can be submitted at any time, and we aim to return a decision within 6 weeks. So it's a shorter time frame than the large grants. We also accept auction applications. These are time-critical applications of any size for works coming up for sale at auction. The turnaround time is obviously much quicker due to the nature of auction purchases. So we ask for 10 working days for auctions outside of London and 7 working days for auctions within London to return a decision. Additionally, we can support commissions. These are grants, large or small, for the creation of a new work, and my colleague Ying will be speaking about those in a little more detail in a minute. And finally, gifts and bequests, in which we provide support for individuals to gift or bequest art to public collections. The image on screen here is a recent successful example of a small grant that we gave. The application came from Norwich Castle Museum and Gallery, and they acquired the work Deep, Deep and Deepening by the artist Laura Wilson. They received a grant of £2,520 in 2022, and the total cost of the work was £5,600. It's a moving image work that was commissioned as part of the New Geographies project, and it explores the hidden landscape of Must Farm, which is an archaeological site near Peterborough. The work references East Anglia's complex histories, connecting the counties of Norfolk, Cambridgeshire and Suffolk. And the applicant museum wanted to collect a contemporary work that brought a new perspective to archaeological sites. And they felt that the way in which this work referenced landscape, labour and the body would create new opportunities for them to engage their audiences, particularly younger and new audiences to the museum. Since acquisition, it's been displayed at the museum as part of a temporary exhibition, and they have further plans to hold screenings of it in the future. So it's been represented quite well. So to move on. So in terms of the object specifically, we can support acquisitions where the object is of national or international importance, where it's an object of significant regional interest and it's judged to be of good museum quality, or objects which will artistically enrich collections and support new areas of collecting. We typically say that you should come to us for about 30 to 40% of the total cost of the work. But in cases where this isn't possible, then we would ask you to look into all possible funding sources and ensure that your funding package is as mixed as possible between us, other external funders, internal fundraising, or local funding as well. So at least a few of those. And within an application, we ask for good quality images of the work, an independent valuation. So that would be done by someone who doesn't benefit from the sale and is not aware of the price beforehand. A condition report, the detail level of which will depend on how critical the condition of the object is, and a funding package that's as diverse as possible, as I said, and needs to add up to the total amount. And then the body of the application is your case for the importance of the work and how it fits within the collection and how you will engage audiences with it. So again, on the screen is another small grant example. This one was an application from Oxfordshire Museum, who wanted to acquire this early medieval brooch. They received a grant of £1,350 in 2023, and the total cost of the acquisition was £3,000. The brooch was metal detected in Oxfordshire and reported as treasure to the coroner in 2020. Brooches of this style have a regional association with Germany, and this brooch in particular is thought to be an import from the continent. It straddles two cultural periods, and the museum saw it as a cultural bridge between the late Roman Empire and the kingdoms that followed in the early medieval period. And this was a gap that the museum had identified within their collection. And so they thought this would be a suitable addition, both for research purposes and to display for their audiences to connect their quite extensive Roman and medieval collections in terms of it filling that gap. It will be put on long-term display in the museum, and they have plans to make physical 3D copies of the object as well as virtual copies. And these will be produced for engagement activities that are focused on visitors either with access needs or school sessions held at the museum in terms of interactivity. So I will move on and speak quickly about the Jonathan Ruffer curatorial grants. So grants through this program support curators, museum professionals and researchers to undertake travel and other activities that will extend and develop their curatorial expertise and collections-based knowledge. Since 2012, we've helped over 500 museums with a wide range of projects, and we're able to offer grants totaling approximately £75,000 per year. The programme is open to arts professionals who are employed or working in partnership with a UK museum or arts organisation that has charitable status and regularly programmes exhibitions. As you can see here, the grants can support UK and international travel and accommodation, training courses and programmes of study, including online programmes, subscriptions, and any other research activities where a strong case can be made for it developing the curatorial skills of the applicant. We have two grant streams within this programme as well. The first is small grants, which are up to £2,000 and can again be considered on a rolling basis. For these, we would aim to return a decision within 8 weeks after the submission, and large grants, which are over that £2,000 barrier and are roughly up to £5,000 as a maximum. And again, these would be considered at a panel meeting, which take place twice a year in the spring and in the autumn. In terms of applicants, we can consider applications with more than one applicant and recognise that certain projects will really benefit from a collaborative approach rather than one person undertaking the activities. But we would ask that a really strong case is made for each individual person going on the trip within the application, and would advise that we're unlikely to consider applications for more than 3 applicants on one trip. So I've got a couple of examples of recent projects. The first of which came from the Eden Project. They were given a grant of £2,000 for their senior curator to undertake a 10-day research trip to Brazil. I've just noticed that slide says the Hepworth Wakefield, and that should say Eden Project, so apologies for that. But yes, the research trip was focused on their attendance of an exhibition and symposium held by an indigenous Brazilian collective named Selvagem. And with this collective, they were planning to develop new artistic outputs at the site, potentially including a commission and a related public programme. The trip also informed Eden Voices, which is a 2-year strategic EDI programme of research and development, in which they want to support creative practitioners working at the intersection of environment, culture, and social justice. Within the trip, they visited artist studios, local museums, and engaged with sustainable and regenerative practices. So the two images on the screen here, on the left is the symposium that was held by Selvagem that they attended, and on the right was one of the artist studio visits that they undertook. In terms of outcomes of the project, they found it really helpful to build relationships with a wider network of Brazilian galleries and cultural partners. It's allowed them to support the artistic career development of the collective that they are working with and catalyze future opportunities. And it's assisted them with demonstrating the power of art and culture to inspire environmental action, which is obviously very central to the work that Eden Project does. And for a second example, this was another recent RUFA grant, which was given to the Powell Cotton Museum. They received £2,000 for their curator and writer to visit East Africa for collections research. This curator was a lead on the co-curation project at the museum titled Decolonization and Practice. It focused on the reinterpretation and redisplay of their permanent collection, which contains many objects from Kenya, Uganda, and South Sudan that were obtained in the early 1900s. The museum's collection has its roots in the colonial era, and historically, interpretation and display has focused on the founder and his family, rather than having a critical engagement with the actual objects in the collection and where they've come from. And so this trip seemed very important in terms of decentering the collector and foregrounding communities from which the items were purchased, which is very important work. So the trip itself included visits to national museums in Uganda and Kenya, as well as visits to the communities in each country to conduct primary research on how those objects are named and used by the people they came from. The curator was able to consult museum colleagues at the national museums and see exhibits that gave them insight into ways to present diverse material culture from different ethnic groups, which they found really important in terms of the redisplay back at the museum. Additionally, they were able to collect supplementary material such as oral testimonies, films, and photographs that has allowed them to enrich the redisplay. And finally, it's allowed them to develop links and partnerships with partner organizations on the African continent, which has allowed them to sustain longer-term development and care of the collection through open conversation with those organizations. So yeah, both really interesting projects and ones we've been pleased to support. And with that, I will hand over to Ying, who's going to speak a bit about commissions.
Thank you.
Sorry, can I do that for you?
That's okay. Thanks. Okay. Thanks, Joe. So my name is Ying, and I'm Senior Programs Manager at the Art Fund. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about our support for commissions, and also sort of briefly go over some of the examples of past commissions that we've supported. So at the Art Fund, we're sort of increasing our support for the commissioning of new work. And we realize that this is an excellent way to get a work of art for good value, to support a greater diversity of artists, and to acquire works that directly respond to your collection. And more organizations are coming to us to discuss their plans in commissioning new work, and they're recognizing the advantages of commissioning as opposed to acquiring an already existing work. You get to support a living artist. You get to work with communities, different communities, perhaps local to your organization, that might access new audiences for your organization. And the experience of commissioning and the process of commissioning also allows the organization, we find more and more, to sort of have this experience of working directly with an artist. And this often provides an area of learning for the organization as well as a whole. And we want to hear all about that in your application. So with our commission applications, it works in roughly the same way as our acquisitions applications, where they're broken up into small and large grants. So small grants are where the grant request is under 7,500 and the total project budget is under 15,000. So that's exactly the same as our small and large acquisition grant. We consider them in exactly the same way as well. So for small grants, we consider them on a rolling basis, but also for large commission grants, they go to our board meeting, which there are 5 a year. The slightly different way that the commissioning grants are considered is that they go to a small subsection of our trustees called the commission subcommittee, and we sit together and discuss your application in more detail. And we sort of ask slightly different questions, I suppose, in terms of the application itself. So what we really want to know is the benefits. So the benefit to the artist. So how will working with this specific artist benefit the organization and the collection? It might be that it activates an object that's already existing in your collection. It might be a chance to work with an artist that will access new audiences. And with that, we want to know the benefit to the organization. So, perhaps it's these new learning experiences, as I described, or the access to new audiences, or that it activates, an area of your collection that you're not able to with an existing work, for example. And that sort of brings me to the benefit to audiences, which is quite obvious, really, that commissioning a work will more and large sort of access new audiences and will allow you to work sometimes directly with communities that you wish to engage. So there's 2 examples of past commissions that we've supported. And I really wanted to sort of list these examples to sort of show you the sort of breadth of commissions that we're willing to sort of applications that have been successful that we're willing to consider. So sometimes they are from an organization that doesn't have a collection, in which case they might work in partnership with an organization that has a collection. It might be, in this case, Studio Voltaire. This was a commission project with an artist that manifests in a working toilet. And we worked, I remember, on the application in terms of talking about those 3 things: the benefit to the artist, to the organization, and to audiences that they wish to engage. And a lot of these considerations we have with the organization ahead of time. So we really talk about things like your budget assessment. So as opposed to an independent valuation, which is required for an acquisition application, we ask that you run your budget by an independent person that doesn't stand to benefit from the commission, but also someone who might know the artist and might have commissioned the artist before, for example, to sort of, I suppose, assess and give advice to you and to the Art Fund, assurances that your budget is sort of good value for money. We also ask for risk assessment. We might ask for architectural drawings, planning permission, artist statements, previous examples of the artist's commissioned work. We might, in the process of your application, ask to make a site visit, for example, if it is a public sculpture, for example. So all of these considerations are part of the application process. And I suppose it just suffice to say here that commissions come in all forms, and we're very much open in talking to you and discussing to hear more about what you wish to do. And often we realize that a commission work, there is a degree of risk involved as the resultant work doesn't exist yet, but we're willing to talk you through the process about what is possible and what we'll accept and how to make your application to us. The next example I'll talk about is a case, whoops, went too far. So we use this as a case study, and this is an example where the commissioning body, Art Night, is a free contemporary arts festival in London, and they work with the artist Melanie Manjo to commission this work, Dance All Night. So even though they were not, they don't have an existing collection, they partnered with Arts Council Collection, who had a connection with the artist through existing works in their collection, to acquire the work and to be able to show it nationally. The work can also exist as a public performance, a single screen moving image, as well as a wall-mounted text instructions. So I guess, yeah, these examples I've cited is just to sort of really give you a range and understanding of what we are able to accept. And yes, like I said, we're very open to be able to talk to you about your ideas in terms of commissioning. So we realize more and more that organizations are understanding and appreciating the benefits of this more and more. So yeah, so more than happy to come and talk to you and take any questions. I'll just briefly go on and pass on to my colleague Lucy to wrap up.
Thanks, Ying. Yeah, I think that is. Oh, let me take that out so I'm not hearing myself speak. So the final thing to say is to keep up to date with all things Art Fund, sign up to our museum bulletin. The QR code is there. That will send out our museum director's report once it's published later this month. We also have our Reimagine grants opening at the end of the month too, and they're focusing specifically on partnerships and a local authority reliant organisations. So for all the latest opportunities, insights, do sign up as a great way to stay in touch. I think we have maybe just under 5 minutes for questions now. So if there's any kind of questions, do let us know. And we'll also hang around at the end. So if you want to chat more informally, we can do that as well.
Fantastic. Thank you. Some great opportunities there. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for the speakers at all? If you want to raise your hands. Well, it's for me to say it's fantastic that you hear what the Art Fund's doing. So thank you to Joe, thank you to Ying, and thank you to Lucy very much. A round of applause. Thank you.